Good evening, dear friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I am very happy to welcome here for you for the first time this year here, and we have a very perfect guest for the next hour. I am happy to welcome for the first time here Khaled Fahmy. He's a historian of the Middle East with a special emphasis on 19th century Egypt. Also, if we will talk today about present Egypt, of course. And he is professor at Tufts University for the whole Middle East, North Africa region, as I understand. And it's really an impressive range of topics he's dealing with. I mean, for example, I saw a book about Islamic law and forensic medicine in modern Egypt, or book chapters like the one of the 1919 revolution in Egypt, or another one on Nasser in a book called Global Middle East into the 21st Century. Sounds very interesting. Or also editor of books like Policing Cairo in the 19th century. You see, lots of things. He studied at American University in Cairo and afterwards at University of Oxford, and taught at Princeton, New York University, Columbia, Harvard, and Cambridge. Impressive list. So, Professor Fahmy, welcome. He will talk to and with us without Egypt of today. 10 years of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, who in summer 2013, as you well know, brought to an end the presidency of Muslim brother Mohamed Morsi, but with the support, we have to say, of many sectors of the Egyptian society. I remind you, of course, I mean, we are in Vienna, of Mohamed El-Baradei, the former Director General of the IAEA and Nobel Peace Prize winner. So it was a special situation in 2013. To be exact, Sisi's jubilee, if it is one, as president, will be reached in June 24. Yeah, we, the Kreisky Forum, decided we should have this talk because of the presidential election in Egypt, which was expected to be held in the beginning of this year, but was done then without much fanfare in December already. But the early date, at least the month December, was announced already before October 7th, the date which changed the whole Middle East. Egypt is the only Arab country bordering on the Gaza Strip. And I am sure and I know that the war and the situation for Egypt will come up during the next hour. It would be stupid to avoid it. However, of course, we stay focused on Egypt, even if we have to look beyond the borders. And I only remind you, there is a terrible war going on in Sudan too, no? For example, or this blind spot in the eyes of the attention of the West, which is Libya, for example, the West, I mean, the international community. According to the constitution, to the Egyptian constitution, Sisi could stay in office until 2030, which then makes 16 years if he serves them. And the genesis, I don't have to tell you, is classical, but I want to stress, and you know what I mean, not only Middle Eastern. You become president, you change the constitution in favor of longer terms because they ask you so much, and then naturally, your next term, I mean, the one who changed, which changed the constitution, is supposed to be your first, and so on. But I'll give, of course, the floor to Khaled, who will brief us on how he sees the present and also the future. And afterwards, as always, I will capitalize on my position here and start with questions. But of course, as always, you are very welcome to put yours in written form. And thank you again, Professor Fahmy. Thank you for sharing your time and your thoughts with us.
Thank you very much, Professor Gudrun Harrer, and it's
Without
a pleasure.
professor.
It's a pleasure to be with you, and thank you very much for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to talk about Egypt, even though what I'm going to share with you are not very uplifting ideas or happy thoughts. We are talking in the occasion of 10 years of President Sisi. President Sisi came to power officially. He assumed the presidency on the 8th of June in 2014, following a military coup that he staged the previous year, ending the presidency of the previous president, Mohamed Morsi, that lasted for only 1 year. Just to put things in context, that presidency of the Muslim Brotherhood, headed by Mohamed Morsi, came in the wake of a mass revolution that started in Egypt in January of 2011, that ended the 30-year rule of President Hosni Mubarak. It is this tumultuous period of revolution, of people in the streets, of demonstrations, and of significant strikes in industrial sectors in Egypt that lasted for a long time. It started even before 2011 and continued till 2013. 2013 witnessed some of the bloodiest events that modern Egypt had witnessed, culminating in a big massacre that Sisi masterminded against the Muslim Brotherhood supporters who had taken to a sit-in in a square in Cairo in August, and it was dispersed with brutal force that resulted in more than 800 civilians being killed in one day. It's the bloodiest day in Egyptian modern history. But since the coup and since him coming to power officially as president of the country a year later, Sisi has worked hard to restore calm and stability to the streets of Cairo and other cities, and to again restore some degree of or semblance of stability with a very high significant amount of violence and state violence in particular. But it's important to note that Sisi did not come simply to restore the status quo ante. It's not simply that he wanted to restore the presidency or the country to what it had before the Muslim Brotherhood. Sisi is much more ambitious and has been very successful in restructuring the nature of Egyptian political system and Egyptian society. He officially calls it the Second Republic, which, as I said, is nothing less than a complete restructuring of the Egyptian state. Before I go into some details of that, let me just also highlight some of the basic features economically and politically, and then also in terms of foreign and regional relations. There is, if we start with the political scene, as I said, there's a complete clampdown on all and every kind of dissent. There's a closure of the public sphere. At the same time, there is a significant enhancement of the role of the military in daily affairs of Egyptians, in the economy, in politics, in public life. There is an erosion of basic principles that were not robust, but they were important features of the Egyptian political system, specifically the principle of separation of powers, that had been cast aside. Economically, as I said, the military is now given a significant role in running the economy, military companies, military sector, military structures that are established, that are encroaching on the public sector and definitely on the private sector as well. The economy is in deep crisis, very high rate of inflation, more than 30%, high rate of unemployment, very severe pressure on the Egyptian pound. The Egyptian pound has lost a very significant amount of its value since Sisi came to power. Suffice to say that the exchange rate when Sisi came to power in 2014 was $1 would make 8 pounds, Egyptian pounds. It's now officially, the exchange rate is 1 to 31. An unofficial exchange rate is $50, 50 pounds per dollar. There is a staggering foreign debt pressure. Egypt has been borrowing savagely from international banks and lending agencies, and there is a significant foreign debt repayment bill that Egypt has to pay. In 2024 alone, it is something like 42 billion dollars. Regionally, Egypt has lost whatever small or regional or global power or clout that it used to have in the 60s. And it is facing severe challenges, most specifically now, challenge, as you have pointed out, in the Sudan. There's a serious problem in the Sudan, but more importantly in Ethiopia, with the construction of the grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam that on the Nile, on the Blue Nile, that affects significantly Egypt's intake of its waters. And of course, as you know, Egypt is highly dependent on irrigation. This is a matter of extreme vital significance, and Egypt has no means under Sisi, has failed to find a way to deal with this serious existential threat to it. And then, of course, the serious problem that is happening right at Egypt's doorsteps in Gaza, with today the US Foreign Secretary is in Egypt, and he's the second visit, the fourth to the region, but the second to Egypt, where he's putting pressure on the Egyptian regime to allow for the resettlement of the Palestinians of the Gaza Strip in the Sinai Peninsula, something that the Egyptian regime and Sisi is resisting. So these are the things that I want to talk about. So I stated them briefly. Let me go back and elaborate in some details about the political, the economic, and the external affairs scenarios. So politically, I think, I mean, when Sisi came to power, he came with the, I mean, we can talk about when exactly Sisi planned the coup, whether this was something that he had masterminded in 2011, or this is something that the military felt it had to interfere in maybe in 2013. The jury is out, and this is something that that will be the subject of many research for the years to come. I personally do not think that Sisi had planned a coup in 2011. I don't think Sisi or anyone in the military had planned a coup in the beginning of the revolution in 2011, what in the West is referred to as the Arab Spring. I think this is something that developed as a result of the Muslim Brotherhood mismanagement of the economic and political situation. I think my analysis is that the tacit understanding between the military and the Muslim Brotherhood that kind of developed in 2012 and early 2013, whereby the Muslim Brotherhood was expected by the military to control the crowds in the streets, failed. The Muslim Brotherhood could not control the crowds in the streets, and the military at that time felt that it had to interfere, otherwise things will spiral out of control. In other words, I do not undermine the legitimacy of the Muslim Brotherhood. They came to power through fair and open elections, but they mismanaged the economy, and they did not do what was expected of them as far as the military was concerned, which is to control the streets. Anyway, that is what prompted the coup in my reading. And as I said, this came at a very, very high cost in terms of human life, done by the military and the Muslim Brotherhood in the very bloody months of August 2013 onwards till early 2014. As far as I can understand, I think Sisi misunderstood 2011, misunderstood the revolution, misunderstood that these were legitimate calls for reforming the Egyptian state, for reforming Egyptian society, the economy, and he preferred to see them as a conspiracy by outside players. And he thought that it is incumbent upon the state, and specifically, the military, to end this state of chaos as he saw it. But more importantly, I think the military and military intelligence, and Sisi in particular, saw in 2011 and 2012 and 2013 an opportunity for the military to restore its dominance over the so-called Egyptian deep state. A deep state that is divided, as Hazem Qandil has mentioned in his famous book, Soldiers, Spies, and Statesmen, between the presidency, the military, and the police or security services. The military had lost clout all the way back since 1967 with the disastrous war against Israel. And so throughout the 70s and 80s, it is really the police that have stepped in to defend the regime. I think in 2011, the military saw it as an opportune moment for it to step in and restore its lost hegemony. And it did this, and it established its hegemony over the Ministry of Interior. And now we see Sisi in control of the presidency, in control of the military, and in control of the security services. And he, in repeated steps, very subtle, very clear, sighted, and very determined, he managed to do something that not even Nasser could do, which is to unify security services. And this is a strategic decision that has been studied extensively by another Egyptian scholar, Hussam Hamalawi, in Berlin, who has written a magnificent PhD dissertation specifically on this topic. And his argument is very solid. Dividing security services is a tactic that autocrats use in order to prevent a military coup. But a divided security services situation is not helpful to deal with mass street uprisings. And this is what Sisi then managed to do. He himself staged a coup and then proceeded to unify the security services because he is no longer afraid of an internal coup. The danger now is the streets, and the streets can only be confronted with the unified security services. So this is something that is very significant. This is something that we have not seen before. The degree to which the presidency now is in control of all Egyptian security services is something that no previous Egyptian president had managed to do. And Sisi has managed to do that. With him in control of the military, with him in control of security services, including, of course, military intelligence, out of which he personally came, Sisi is no longer in need of political parties. So Egypt, of course, cannot be said to have had a robust political system with truly democratic, powerful, popular political parties with strong popular bases. But under Nasser, there was the Arab Socialist Union, through which Nasser managed to, he didn't really believe much in it, but it was an important agent of the state. Under Nasser, under Sadat and Mubarak, we had the National Democratic Party, which was the official state party, and the president of the republic was the head of that party. And that party played an important role in politics, specifically in controlling the countryside. Sisi does not have a political party. He does not believe in it. He's not a member of any political party. His intelligence services do control some political parties, but everybody realizes that these parties are not, they are basically paper tigers, and they are controlled ultimately by different intelligence services. So there is no government party. There is an undermining of parliament. Parliament is a rubber stamp, more so than it had ever been, even under Nasser. Elections are meaningless, and I agree with you, Gudrun, in what you said about, I don't even know, and I don't care to know. I used to follow the latest elections because I was backing a potential presidential candidate, Ahmed Tantawi, and he was barred from running, from having his name put on the ballot through different kinds of ruses and legal stratagems. So no one is taking elections seriously. They're meaningless. The opposition parties have been destroyed. Non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and civil society organizations have been eviscerated. There has been a militarization and a securitization of the political scene and of the entire public life in Egypt. Sisi's aim, in which he has been successful, was not simply to manage dissent, but to eradicate dissent. And he has managed to transform Egypt into a military camp. Egypt is now run as a military camp, and that is the model. And I can go in some details, and I just want to highlight maybe 2 or 3 important legal means through which incrementally Sisi has managed to change the nature of the Egyptian political scene and establish what he calls the new republic. One thing is the important constitutional amendments that were done in 2019 that have changed many things. Article 140 of the Constitution now changed the length of the presidential terms from 4 years to 6 years, and changed the number of times that the president can run. Actually, now Sisi can run not once, but twice. He ran now once from 2024 until 2030, but he can run again from 2030 to 2036. So that is the effect of the Constitution amendments. They made the ticking clock now, not back then. So he can run for another time in 2030. So we can have Sisi in the presidency until 2036, unless, of course, there's another constitutional amendment that removes this limit. There are many other amendments that undermine the nature of the Egyptian state and that establish the military as the guardian of the constitution, the guardian of the state, the guardian of democracy. This is stated explicitly in Article 200 that basically says the military is the guardian of the constitution, the guardian of the state. And this is very significant. The military is now not part of the state. The military is above the state. The military is entrusted by the constitution to protect the state, to protect the secular nature of the state, as it said in Article 200, and to protect democracy and to protect personal freedoms. Not the courts, not parliament, not the government, not the cabinet, but the state, the military. Article 234 was changed to make the appointment of the Minister of Defense conditional upon the approval of the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces. In other words, now the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces appoints the Minister of Defense, not even the President, let alone Parliament. In other words, the military appoints its own head. No one except the military appoints the Minister of Defense. Article 204 enhanced the jurisdiction of military tribunals. And I can go into details, but I don't want to waste our time. The president, according to the revised Article 185, is given the right to choose the heads of judicial bodies. Article 189 gives the president the right to appoint the Attorney General. Article 193 gives the president the right to appoint the Supreme Court president. So the president now is in control of the judiciary. The Attorney General, the judicial bodies, and most importantly, the Supreme Constitutional Court. The presidents of all of these judicial bodies are selected, not simply appointed, selected by the president. And there has been a significant militarization of the public space. A very important law, 107 of 2013, banned public protests. This is the famous protest law. In 2015, an anti-terrorism law was passed, giving a very vague and wide definition of terrorism. And that is the law that has been scooping every member of the opposition, no matter how minor, and being charging these members, any opposition figure, with terrorism and handing them hefty prison sentences. Law 149 of 2019, organizing the non-governmental organization, civil society, makes it mandatory for any NGO to respect so-called public order, national security, and public morals. Effectively, what this means is that you cannot really have any NGO that deals with human rights, because by definition, if you are a human rights organization, you are then delving with questions that touch upon the existing public order and existing national security. And these now are protected by this law 149 of 2019. You cannot challenge public order. You cannot endanger national security. So this is in terms of politically, Egypt had never, ever in its modern history witnessed a darkest moment, a moment darker than this one. There's no opposition, there's no politics. I mean, politics had been suspended. What Sisi is doing is managing the country through intelligence services, and through the military. But the idea of a political system, a political sphere in which different factions, different opinions, different sectors of society compete peacefully in the public sphere, that principle is anathema to Sisi. That is, for him, a recipe for chaos, and he would not tolerate it. Economically, the situation is is not much better. There is prodigious external borrowing from external borrowing agencies that has left Egypt with a heavy foreign debt and severe shortage of hard currency that is needed to finance essential commodities. As I said earlier, debt repayment that are due in 2024 alone is at an all-time high. It's $42 billion that Egypt needs to repay this year. The three major rating agencies, Moody's, S&P, and Fitch, have recently downgraded Egypt's sovereign debt, declaring them junk territory. That is, junk territory is the term used by lending agencies, by rating agencies, basically declaring that there is a high risk of default on debt obligations. So this is how the Egyptian economy is viewed. There is a high risk that Egypt would default on its external debt. And this debt has been these very, very rapid, high, and short-term debts with very high rates of interest are something that Sisi has engaged in order to finance projects that, to put it at its best, are infrastructure projects that by their very nature give their yields over a long period. And if put not so generously, and that is how I would put them, they are fanciful, wasteful projects. The most significant of them is this fanciful, bizarre project of building a new capital of Egypt, the so-called New Administrative Capital, NAC, in the desert between Cairo and Suez. This is a huge project that is costing billions and billions of dollars. The project we can talk about its logic, but it is staggering, and it's not, and the first phase of which has been announced, it's over, and now they're entering the second phase. The first phase has failed. The government has not succeeded in selling the units that it had built. And we can talk about the economic and political and security logic of this fanciful project if you want in the Q&A. As I said, the exchange rate of the pound to the dollar used to be 1 to 8 in 2014. It is now 1 to 31. The non-official, the black market rate, used to be 1 to 9 in 2014. It's now 1 to 50. In other words, what we are seeing is a 456% increase in over 10 years in the exchange rate, or 46% per annum. And of course, there's high rate of inflation, 33%, down from 38% in October, but it has hovered around between 30 to 35% over the past year. and Egyptians are suffering all across the board. As I said, the foreign policy, and I will end with that, Egypt has a strong alliance regionally with the United Arab Emirates, with the Saudi Arabia, in clamping down on the revolutionary moment that was witnessed 10 years ago. However, Egypt is maintaining its distance from the UAE and Saudi Arabia when it comes to direct military intervention in Yemen or in Libya. It is facing this existential threat in Ethiopia, as I mentioned, and now the serious problem with Gaza. I will end with a couple of notes on Gaza. As we have seen in Blinken's first visit and in today's visit, I've just been checking, Egypt is reiterating, or Sisi is reiterating his objection to any attempts by the Americans and the Israelis to resettle the Gaza Palestinian population into Sinai. There has been rumors that Sisi personally was not objecting to this. There are rumors that Sisi actually had a price tag of $20 billion that he was willing to accept in exchange for opening the borders and establishing some population centers in the north of Sinai for the Gaza population to be relocated to it. The rumors say that it is the Egyptian military that objected to this plan, the Egyptian high brass that objected to this, which is something I can understand. The Egyptian military has always considered Sinai in general and northern Sinai in particular to be its turf. Egypt continues to have a serious problem with Islamist terrorist organizations that are working in northern Sinai. The latest event happened only a few months ago in July when Arish, the capital of North Sinai, military headquarters there, was attacked, and 8 senior Egyptian army officers were reportedly killed in that incident. So there is an insurgency up in northern Sinai that Egypt has not really managed to control. And to then move a significant, millions of Palestinians, including members of Hamas, to resettle in Egypt, this is something that the Egyptian military would never allow. This is something that did not start now. I, as a student of modern Egyptian history, can take us all the way back to 1955. In 1955, Palestinian guerrillas based in Gaza, which was at that time under Egyptian control, when they attempted to stage their attacks on Israel using Gaza, that was one of the reasons that spiraled into a crisis that led to the 1956 Suez War. The famous Suez, the Battle of Suez, the tripartite aggression on Egypt in 1956, is not only about the nationalization of the Suez Canal. It actually started a year earlier with the problem on the borders, because when the Palestinians, Palestinian Fidaiyin, as they were called at that time, staged their attacks on Israel, Israel retaliated, and the retaliation ended with killing of scores of Egyptian policemen and military people, undermining Nasser in the eyes of many Egyptians. So this is something that is understood by the Egyptian military. And this, by the way, when you look and compare Egypt to Syria and Lebanon and Jordan, Egypt is the only country that does not have Palestinian refugee camps on its borders with Israel. And this is not something that the Egyptian military is ready to undertake now. That is why I think this is a red line for the Egyptian military, regardless of what Sisi may or may not prefer. I will stop here and will receive any questions.
Thank you very much for this really fascinating talk. I mean, I could have listened to you for hours. Um, uh, do I remember correctly, talking about Sinai, that also in 2013, the coup against Morsi, one part of it was already the situation in Sinai, the security situation, and also correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, rumors that Morsi kind of wanted to make deals with other Muslim brothers or something to give away part of Sinai.
I mean, this is part of the rumors against the Muslim Brotherhood, part of
Yeah.
the propaganda, and part of the propaganda that was used also about 2011 in general is
Mm,
that the attacks on Egyptian police centers and police stations and on prisons was staged by Hamas infiltrators
mm,
that have crossed over from Gaza earlier on in 2011, way before the Muslim Brotherhood were elected, won the parliamentary and presidential elections in 2012 and 2013, respectively. So this is part of the propaganda of the
mm,
conspiracy that Egypt has always been subjected to. Hamas operatives infiltrating the borders. There's no proof for that whatsoever. If anything, the opening of there is now evidence that the opening of Egyptian prisons happened by the Egyptian regime, not by outside agencies. And as to the what Morsi might have done in terms of promising parts of Sinai, again, there's no proof of that. I'm not a supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood,
of course
but
not.
as far as this particular allegation is
Mm,
concerned, there's no proof for it. I think more importantly is to think about when we think about Gaza, when we think about Egypt and Gaza, who exactly is in control of the borders between Egypt and Gaza? It is military intelligence. Military intelligence have taken over this task way back since 2005 when Israel accomplished its unilateral withdrawal from Gaza under the previous Prime Minister Sharon. Um, since that time, the Egyptian regime has been really collaborating, if not complicit, with the Israeli government in establishing this very, very firm blockade over 1.9, if not 2 million Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip. The main item here is a security concern. The Egyptian regime under Mubarak and continues till today controls this very significant conduit into Gaza via the Rafah crossing using security concerns alone, not international law, not humanitarian ideas, not, of course, questions of principles and justice. It is how many calories do we allow to enter? What kind of security profile of individuals do we have in order to allow people crossing this way or that way? And all of this is done in close collaboration between Egyptian military intelligence and Israeli occupation authorities. This is something that is very significant. Again, as a student of modern Egyptian history, I can tell you that Palestine as an issue, as a portfolio within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which itself is one of the oldest ministries in the Egyptian government. And within that ministry, Palestine is the oldest and largest portfolio for obvious reasons as far as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. That portfolio is effectively taken and has been snatched away from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and given to military intelligence, not under Sisi, but under Mubarak. In other words, there has been a securitization, and in my terms, I would say and Israelization of Egyptian relations with the Gaza Strip. In other words, it is Israel that forces its principles and its tactics on the Egyptian authorities, and it is the military intelligence that manages this very complex and very important portfolio. And this is something that predates Sisi. That is the question that we need to ask, when we think about Egypt's relations with the Gaza Strip, not the Muslim Brotherhood and the ideological connection that the Muslim Brotherhood may have with Hamas. I mean, that is important, but really the facts on the ground are that it is military intelligence and the military in general, the Egyptian military in general, that runs and controls this whole question of relations with Gaza.
Very interesting. Let me follow up on the question of how much Sisi is in control, because you said there is a red line for military. I mean, they will not allow these resettlement plans or whatsoever. But you also said, in a way, Sisi succeeded in having all control about all security services. I mean, so how powerful is he? Is he really? I am thinking, of course, also of the economy side. No? If we talk about loans, for example, from the IMF, from the International Monetary Fund, they are asking for things which would touch the interest of military. Transparency, talking about the state project, to whom do you give building a street or whatsoever. So would there be also the possibility that the military, at a certain point, if Sisi is forced to enforce some principles of the IMF, for example, that they say, no, this guy is not one of us anymore. He's making pressure, and we have to get rid of him now?
I think that is, I mean, this is a complex question. There are many sides to it, and it's the important question. Thank you for asking. It's very significant. So the way, I mean, I don't have a good answer, but I'll just think aloud with you. I think one way of answering the first part of your question, which is to what degree is he in control of the military, is to another way of asking the question is, to what degree is Sisi dependent on the military as opposed to the military dependent on him? So all these machinations that I talked about, that whereby he had changed the constitution to allow the military to be above the state, immune from any kind of accountability, expanding the military's economic role in the society, enhancing its presence in public life. The military now controls the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in the sense that new diplomats have to have a training course in the military academy. Egyptian teachers have to be approved by the military before being appointed in government schools, and so on and so forth. So all of this, of course, is a way to embed the military firmly in the new republic, and to buy the loyalty of the high brass in the military. The question, and he is in firm and tight control of all the nodal points. There's an interesting thing about the appointment of the chief of staff of the military, because these are people who are changed periodically. He was supposed to be removed, and he wasn't in the latest round only a few weeks ago in December. So the question is, to what degree is the is the chief of staff really an important center of power within the military? We don't know. I mean, people have speculated, but I don't know. I think that question is connected to the economic question, as you pointed out. I think when you start thinking about the UAE and Saudi Arabia, the two major donors I mean, without the financial support of the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia over the past 10 years, especially in the early years, Sisi would not have survived. The regime would not have survived. But we are now seeing elements of rift between, especially United Arab Emirates and Sisi, economically and strategically. Economically, in the sense that they're no longer willing to just send blank checks, and they are not seeing serious returns to their investment, except maintaining stability. But the invitations for Arab capital to come in and invest economically is hampered by the role that Sisi is giving to the military. The same applies to the IMF. The IMF is conditioning its loans to Egypt on serious restructuring, more specifically with regards to the foreign currency regime and floating the Egyptian pound, but also the military companies, and asking for, as you said, transparency and accountability of the military companies, something that, and floating these companies in the Egyptian stock exchange, something that the Egyptian military is refusing to do. So to what degree will Sisi manage to please his external people who are giving him his loans, the debtors that are floating his regime, as opposed to his local partners, if not contenders to power, which is primarily the military. Of course, we're not even speaking about the majority of Egyptians, because they have been cast out of the picture. They're not part of the picture, they are political ciphers. They have been rendered political ciphers by the Sisi regime. I don't even think that he is that concerned with street violence. He's in control of the street. I don't think that is an element of control, of concern. He's concerned about his creditors, both in the Gulf, Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, and the IMF primarily.
But for Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, isn't Egypt simply too important to fail? I mean, I remember that I think the Saudi finance minister 1 year ago in Davos mentioned also what you are saying about the Abu Dhabi, that they don't want to issue any more blank checks, and everybody understood it would be Egypt, among others, Pakistan, and so on. But they are still paying, no?
Yes, and of course, this is something that Sisi has been successful in maintaining. That I mean, he does this with the Saudis, that the Egypt is too big to fall, and he's doing the same thing with the Europeans. You know, the Germans and the Brits and the French, and the Austrians and the Italians. I mean, look at what happened with Italy, with Giulio Regeni, an Italian national being killed in Egypt, and still the Italians are willing to finance Egypt and to send significant amounts of military hardware to Egypt. And the argument that he's using is, if my regime collapses, you will see a flood of refugees leaving Egypt, which will dwarf anything that you've witnessed with the Syrian refugee crisis in 2015-16. So he's successful in using this. He's basically using us Egyptians as, he's taking us ransom. He's using us as pawns in arguments that he enters with the Europeans and with the rich Arab Gulf countries in the Gulf region. So you're absolutely right that this argument is being used, But it doesn't mean, again, there's a limit. I don't think the Saudis will forsake Sisi.
Mm.
I don't think the United Arab Emirates will forsake Sisi, but the United Arab Emirates, for example, now is engaging with people in Sudan that the Egyptian regime considers its enemy. It's dealing with the Ethiopian regime in Ethiopia, and sidestepping Egypt's reservations. And when asked about this, the Emiratis are basically effectively saying our main contender for power in the region is Saudi Arabia, not Egypt. Egypt has been sidelined.
Mm.
Sisi is a weak partner. Um, so the only card he has is a negative card. If I disappear, your interests will be jeopardized. But in that sense, he's hostage to their own demands. And the question is to what degree they can enforce these demands on him.
So perhaps he's even taking advantage of this split of Saudi and Emirati interests, for example, also in Sudan. What I wanted to ask you, why did he bar Ahmed Tantawi? I mean, if he's so much in control, it would have, anyway, he would not have won. Or do you think he would have had, not to win, but to have a significant showing in this election?
No,
Perhaps
Tantawi
you should explain in 2 sentences at least who is Tantawi.
Tantawi was an ex-member of parliament, and he won 2 rounds of elections, but he was barred and prevented from actually taking his seat in parliament, despite winning the last round of elections. So he's an ex-member of parliament. Uh, he's considered to be a Nasserite. He's a member of a Nasserite group, a Nasserite party, but he defected from it. And he's wanted to establish his own party. The problem with Tantawi, as far as the regime is concerned, is that he comes from outside the the typical paper parties that the regime controls. He's an independent player, and he wanted to play independently. And he wanted ultimately to base his legitimacy on the streets. He showed enough personal clout, personal charisma, and organizational skills that would enable him potentially to build a movement,
Mhm,
not simply win a seat. That is what the government and the regime is
mhm.
concerned about, and that they can accept some uh, artificial, fictitious contenders to power. I don't even know who the people who stood against
Oh, I forgot.
Sisi are in this last elections, but Tantawi would not play it this way. And that is why he was prevented even from having his name approved by the election committee and put on the ballot ticket.
Mhm. Today we have a very shy audience concerning the questions. I still invite you. You have a few minutes of time. Of course, you know me. I could go on and on and on, but we will not. Of course, 1 hour is more than enough work for you. But still, may I ask you also, because you mentioned it, this, um, I mean, self-prescribed task of being the guardian of the public moral of this regime, which is quite, yeah, even, I mean, it's striking. They really do behave sometimes like, for example, a state where Islam plays a very big role. What's the relationship of this state, of Sisi state and Islam?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a good question because one can easily jump to the conclusion that Sisi, having deposed an Islamist regime, the Muslim Brotherhood, and Mohamed Morsi, is against mixing religion with politics, is a secular, far from it. Sisi is personally a deeply pious religious man, but more importantly, he is someone who uses Islam very importantly and very strategically to bolster his regime. He caters to, I mean, we have to also say that Sisi is not completely with no support. There is support. There are sectors of the Egyptian society who support Sisi.
Yes.
His popularity has been reduced significantly over the past 10 years, specifically because of the economic situation. But there will always be a core of people who support Sisi. Who are these people? What is the base of the support for the regime? Well, one important segment is conservative Egyptians, right of center Egyptians. Of course, there's the military and the police, which are huge segments of Egyptian society, but also the religiously, socially conservative Egyptians. And he caters for them. He sells himself, he uses two cards. One is that he's an Islamic modernizer. He does not shy away from explicitly saying that he is divinely inspired, that he has divinely inspired insights and ideas, and that he protects the Coptic minority. A couple of days ago, it was Coptic Christmas. And as usual in Coptic Christmas, the big celebration on Christmas Eve, on the 6th, the night of the 6th of January, he goes to the big cathedral that he built in the new administrative capital, one of the biggest buildings in Egypt, in fact. And he celebrates this role, that he's a protector of this religious minority. Of course, the return for this is that the Copts should not have any political demands. So in return for being protected, they forfeit their political rights. The second thing is that he's an Islamic modernizer, that he presents a moderate Egyptian Islam different from the radical Islam of the Islamists or even of the Muslim Brotherhood. So this is a card that he uses. Is not very successful because, of course, he's not inspired by God, and he doesn't really have, except very reactionary positions when it comes to women, when it comes to LGBTQ plus communities that have been targeted repeatedly by his regime, and even Islamists. Apart from the Muslim Brotherhood, Quranists, there's a sect and Shi'is in Egypt. So anyone who does not follow the state orchestrated, the state-defined definition of Islam is that is defined by him and his agencies is suspect. So this is not a secular person by any means, but this is someone who believes in an important role played by his own Islam in the political sphere.
Mm. In a way, the question which was coming, if you are still willing to give us some minutes, has to do with what you are talking about. I mean, the question is, are there any positives? Because we spoke about the negatives of Sisi's regime. Of course, I remember really in 2013 the total, I mean, the fear of chaos, and there was, I mean, it were two terrible years for the security. People had the feeling that everything is breaking down. But I mean, Sisi could do this only because he is a very gifted man in a way. So what what makes him strong? What are his positives?
No, I mean, what he presents to the Egyptian people is stability, ultimately. Very little else. I mean, he talks about the new republic. He talks about Egypt being a grand country. He talks about all of this, but in real details, there's nothing specific that he offers the Egyptian public except stability. He is Mr. Stability, and of course, he did bring stability. The question I am asking, the question I have always been asking, is stability at what cost? And I have always believed that a deal that is given to any people, in which people have to choose between stability and freedom, is a Faustian deal that should be rejected. And that on the long run, people who forfeit their freedom in return for stability will end up losing both. So that is, and we have seen that. So I am not at all dismissing the fear of instability and of chaos. I take it seriously. I do not at all undermine the fear that people have of chaos. I take that seriously and I respect it. But I ask people to think seriously and not to give up on their freedom, and to think about it historically rather than in terms of ideology or some abstract principles. And to go back to Nasser, because Sisi is very often compared to Nasser. Nasser gave the Egyptian people another deal that I also think was an unfair one, but it is much better than this one. What Nasser in the 60s, the Gamal Abdel Nasser, the president of Egypt from 52 to 1970, what he gave Egyptians is the following deal. I am willing to give you social and economic benefits in return for you giving up your constitutional and political rights. What Nasser was giving was free education, guaranteed government employment for graduates of universities, subsidized transportation, free health services. And for many Egyptians, this was a huge boom. I mean, a huge expansion in their rights. And many people have been catapulted from the poor classes to the middle classes. Mm-hmm. And many Egyptian graduates of universities owe their education to Nasser. Generations of Egyptian intellectuals say without Nasser's education, we would have been paupers, we would have been beggars on the street. And they turn a blind eye to the fact that there was no democracy. I think this is not a good deal, but it is infinitely better than what is being offered now. Sisi is not offering any social services or any economic benefits.
What about jobs? Because there is a question regarding jobs for young people. I mean, if the whole industry and enterprises are in the hand of the military, there should be.
Yeah, exactly. I wish the military were given a mandate. Okay, you give these big tasks, the big projects to the military because the military has the wherewithal and the expertise and the companies that can undertake whatever projects. Of course, it's a bogus argument, but let's just, for benefit of argument, say, fine. But why don't you mandate among when you give such deals to the military that they make it a principle to enhance and expand employment, that we will invest in creating jobs. That is not the model that the military is using. The military is in fact using conscript labor. So Egyptians who serve, spend a year, if not 3 years of their lives in the national service by being conscripted in the army, end up working in factories that produce pasta and water and bottled water, or serve in restaurants and hotels run by the military. So there is no job creating companies and projects that the military is investing in. As a result, we have not seen a reduction in the levels of unemployment. That is not the target, that is not the aim, that is not the philosophy, that's not the economic philosophy of the military or of the government. There's no injection of public funds for the interest in creating jobs that then will create a market that will then enhance demand, that will in turn create more jobs. That whole philosophy is completely absent. That is not how Sisi is running the economy. In fact, he wants to cut on the cost of labor, and in that sense, he's not really it is not creating job opportunities.
Well, of course, I mean, with this fast growing population, it's also difficult. I mean, any progress in the economy or jobs or so perhaps is eaten up easily. But it's really time to close. We have also someone who really shows what we were saying, that Sisi has supporters. There is absolutely no doubt about that. I thank you so much, Professor. I found it very interesting and I learned a lot. And thank you also correcting me about this date, 36. This would mean that Sisi will stay president longer than Nasser did, no? You think he
Definitely.
will still be there in 36?
I hope not, but
Mm.
maybe he will.
So thank you very much, and I hope
You.
that next time we can welcome you in person in Vienna. And thanks for your time and for your
Thank you so
insights.
much. I appreciate it. And thank you for everybody for attending and staying with us for this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye.